Hi everybody, this video is for English 3301, Professional Technical Writing. What I'm going to do in this video is walk through some feedback on a reference sheet draft. It's still a rough draft, it's not totally done, but I thought it would be useful to everyone to see and think about and as you're finishing revisions and making choices and all those sorts of things. I also would like to thank Jacob Aston, who volunteered to let me screencast feedback of his technical writing reference sheet. So let's dig in. Hopefully this won't be too long, but I guess we'll find out. So this is Jacob's reference sheet. As you can see, it's mostly complete. So immediately when I look at it, I can tell what it is, and I can tell what it's for. The title is very clear. The title says Technical Writing Genres of Wildlife Biologists. So anybody picking this up would be able to figure out that, oh, hey, this is what this is about. This is maybe kind of who it's for. If it had a title like Reference Sheet Project or Technical Writing Genres or whatever, that wouldn't be quite as specific or quite as useful. But this title, Technical Writing Genres, or something that's specific that tells us the purpose and the subject and kind of clarifies the scope of the document, is very useful to an outside audience. It's a pretty standard organization, so I'm not going to say too much about that. But there's good contrast between the heading and the headings in the rows and the columns, so that's good. I can very clearly see also distinctions between, yes, here's the genres, and so kind of my expectations for this is about genres, and I've got genres here and genres here. I'm kind of able to follow that chain, so that's useful. The goal here is not for you to do exactly what Jacob's done, of course, but to think about, okay, how am I making connections in the design? How am I making repetitions in design? How am I making it clear in the design what kind of stuff is happening here? So in terms of an overall organization, we've got formal versus informal. That makes sense. Just thinking about like different ways to make use of space here. One thing that you could do is, especially because there's so much white space, so much negative unused space in here, one thing that you could do, for example, is flip the text around, and you can really make these categories a little bit more dramatic. This is just an option. This is not something that you have to do. But and it kind of just makes it clear because it's a little bit bigger and a little bit more bold. It makes clear that, hey, this is the major organization that's going on. So that's good. One thing that you can just barely see here is, and I'll talk about this in a minute, is when we're thinking about like format parallelism. Obviously, these are in the same category. They're the categories themselves, and this category makes sense. You can see that this one is aligned very much in the center, and this one is not, and that's because there's a little extra paragraph in here, which doesn't look like a big deal when you're working in it in the middle of it, but in terms of a finished, polished product, that's something that readers can kind of see and go like, oh, that's weird, why don't those line up? So in that case, if you can't see those things, one thing that you can do is you can hit this symbol button, and it'll show and hide all of the symbols and the marks in the document. Actually, we'll do that and so we can see that there's some paragraphing and stuff in here. So if I take that paragraph out, well, that goes away, and it's all good, and it's lined up. So let's dig in a little bit. Also, just like design-wise, as far as what I'm looking at, I've got two big categories here: formal, which is all this stuff up on the top, and informal, which is all this stuff down here on the bottom. That makes a lot of sense. One thing that sticks out to me as confusing is I'm not sure why this one is the darker blue, but it's in the formal category as opposed to in the informal category. I don't know if this needs to join these down here, and so in that case we just move this table line up, or if this needs to be recolored because it's a formal. I don't know, but just, that's something where the design is sending mixed signals, so it's something to watch out for. Overall, the content is, it's not just like in terms of, the eyeballs and just kind of gauging it and looking at it. It's not too short. It's not too long. Right? The text isn't like way crushed down and crammed in where we can't see it. There's some things that I can see kind of staying with the design for a little bit. A couple of things that I notice in terms of design parallelism or format parallelism. So we've got just like random, all of a sudden this one is in a different font, a different typeface from the rest of the cells like it, right? So that's something that we'd want to try to fix. Other things with like format parallelism that, again, can be hard to see if you're looking closely at it and you're drafting it over and over again, but they're just going to jump out to somebody who's looking at it for the first time. So we've got capital F, capital C, and then these are all lowercase. So in this case, that would be something that would be an easy change, and we could just do city, county, federal governments, right? As far as does it need to be all capitalized, or do I need to capitalize every word in a statement or not? That's totally up to you. Just make sure that you kind of pick one and stick with it. I went ahead and capitalized all three of those since they're all three kind of parallel as the start. It's got that little slash in there, so that's good. Usually I'm not just a great big jerk about spelling, but when you got one word off by itself, better make sure it's spelled right. And it's spelled differently down here. And then spelled a third way down here. So that tells me not that Jacob can't spell. It tells me that, okay, we need to pay a little bit more careful attention to spelling throughout. But again, this is a draft. That's no big deal. I'm not going to yell and fuss. But the audiences are very specific. I would be careful with stuff like specific group or specific group. I mean, that's fine, but if we're thinking about like a particular, if you're working from a specific example, go ahead and give us the specific information in that example, right? But that's okay, right? Maybe instead of specific group, if this is a news article about fishing reports, and we're really talking about like fishing reports, then maybe we need to talk about people who are going to go out and fish in a particular location, or etc. So that's just something you can be a little bit more granular with, and as if possible. The arrow bullets are The arrow bullets are fine. They kind of take up a lot of space, but it's not a game changer or not a showstopper. Definitely, you could see like if you went through and bulleted everything, that would be confusing. But since these are very clearly lists, it makes sense to use bullets in there. If you wanted to change up the space a little bit, you could always select multiple items. Go ahead and show you how to do that. Since all of these use the same format of list, I can take this, I can work in my ruler, and I can just kind of scooch it back a little bit, right? And you just kind of judge it, just kind of gauge it, and that's okay. And then I'm just going to make sure I'm going to do that everywhere else, not just in that one. So I really like, one of the things that I really like about the content in this one is there's really great specificity in especially the purpose column. And one thing that really helps do that, and this is a good note for everyone, is that Jacob's using grammatical parallelism. Okay, grammatical parallelism is when you use the same. Let me take that off. Hang on a second. Grammatical parallelism is when you use the same grammatical structure in a repeated structure to show that these things, right, belong in kind of the same level of a hierarchy. So this is all stuff in the purpose category, and this is, like you do that in a list. Um, if everything in the list is a verb or everything in the list is a noun, you want to make sure it's conjugated in the same way. So he's got really great parallelism. The entire purpose column says to gain, to show, to present, to list, to interact, to document. And so that's good parallelism in the uh, structure of the document, which means that this is also that parallelism also means that you're going to be focused on the same type of information here. So that helps, right? Because purpose is all about what is the document doing. So it makes sense to use kind of a verb form here, right? To gain, to show, to present, etc. I do like the specific verbs here: gain, show, collect, list, interact. If it all says to communicate, well, that's not a specific purpose because it's technical communication, so it's all, communication. But I like that these are kind of specific. I'm showing this audience information and how to act on it, right? I'm presenting information about specific research. I'm presenting information to the general public so that, right, I might want to know a little bit more about, for example, here, I'm presenting information to the general public or a certain group of people in a more informal and less professional manner. Well, that's kind of what it's doing, but why am I presenting this information to the general public? Are they going to use it? Are they going to, is it educational? Is it something that they're going to, right, like up here, tell the audience how to act on the research, okay? To share knowledge in a particular community, etc. So, we could always make these more specific, especially in terms of purpose. But this is a good start. I'm going to flip over now to the description column, and we can see we've got parallel, the types of proposals, the types of reports written, but then we've got something different here. This is a journal. And then we have short pieces of text, and then something else here, reporting. That's a totally different structure, so I'm going to use a different color. And then this one kind of comes back to that descriptive note taken. This is kind of more like that blue one as well. So, so in this description column, the parallelism is breaking down a little bit, and so what's happening is he's describing kind of different kinds of information, and this column is kind of grab baggy. So my question is, in the description column, like, what are you using to describe, what is a grant proposal? You've got the purpose over here, and that's clear. So I'm going to want to know, like, what makes a grant proposal that might be distinct from its purpose, right? Is a grant proposal, maybe it's something about like a document that, or where you kind of tell us about it a little bit. That's maybe a little bit distinct from purpose. Because here we have, right, to gain finances to use for research purposes, and here we have to get grants and money to fund research. Well, it's kind of the same thing. We're kind of repeating what we're saying here and here. So I want to think about, like, if this is working in the purpose, what's another kind of piece that I can use to describe this here. If and another option here is, like, if these are falling completely apart, if the description is just like repeating things that we're saying along throughout the rest of the thing, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe we need to cut it entirely, right? Maybe that's something that we don't necessarily need because that information is already here in audience and purpose and characteristics. And so that would maybe spread out a little bit of room and give you more room to work with in the design. So that's a possibility, something to think about. Because, right, we have a lot of repetition here. It's been peer reviewed and it's very credible. And over here, it's peer reviewed and very credible. This, on the other hand, right, it's original information and it has a narrow subject focus. That's kind of new information and it's not really repeated elsewhere. So we're thinking about, like, in terms of the description, right? You know, maybe a grant proposal. If I'm thinking about like what a grant proposal is, right? It describes a project how it will, proceed, whoops, etc. So we're just thinking about how to really kind of succinctly describe or define a grant proposal in this case, if I'm going to keep this. So that kind of goes throughout. I would just overall, as a piece of feedback to Jacob, I would say, like, if we're going to go with these definitions of purpose, which I think these are good and they've got good structure, I'd come back and revisit the descriptions just to make sure that they're distinctive, to make sure that we're not repeating the same information in the description and the purpose, because that seems unnecessary. Maybe there's something else by which we can describe each genre. So that's good. I think, kind of looking on further over here to the right, I like this characteristics column. It's what are the things that make it, and so we've got a little bit of idea about what are the contents, or what are special things that it's going to include, or special things that, like I said, that are kind of definitive of it, that make it what it is. So that's fine. Another thing to note, now I talked about repetition that moves across, and a little bit of repetition is okay, but like I said, if you're repeating the description and the purpose almost verbatim, well, that's not really a great kind of repetition. Now, as far as repetition between items in the same category, that's okay. I'm not worried about that. That kind of repetition is going to be fine, because really we're just showing that these have kind of shared characteristics between different things. And if there is that repetition, that's great. I'm just going to make sure that it's got format parallelism and grammatical parallelism the same way, right? Which is everything from, like we talked about over here, making sure things are spelled the same way every time, or capitalized the same way every time, to making sure that I kind of use the same terminology and make them appear in kind of the same order. So I think that's good. And I think that this information is pretty specific in this characteristics section, so that's good. I also kind of think this is a category that he made up. It's not something that was specifically required in the assignment, but it's kind of, as he was looking at it, this is something that he used to kind of, make distinctions between them. So I think that's super useful. It's very simple. Yes, no, makes sense. Ethics. The one thing that I would think about here is it might be useful to make some of these a little bit more of a statement. Like, what is it about faulty data, that we're trying to say? Is it that we should, must avoid faulty data? Let's keep doing that. Protect, sorry guys, confidentiality, right? Must maintain objectivity, must avoid misuse, right? So, like, because ethics, I mean, the way we've talked about and kind of thought about ethics is what you're supposed to do or what you're supposed to not do, what you're supposed to avoid. So I like kind of, you'll see this in some of the examples, and this isn't really about me so much as it's about like being clear about what's happening here, right? Because if I just see faulty data there, I just see confidentiality there. Okay, well, what about faulty data and confidentiality? Over here I have lists of goals, lists of datas, questions are stated. But over here, faulty data, I'm not sure what to do with that. And it's in the same list as confidentiality and objectivity. So these aren't yet kind of conceptually parallel, and so we might need to add a little bit of language. Maybe it's just a should do this, or writers must, and kind of flesh out that sentence, or something like that. And if you find yourself repeating something, every single time, that's also an opportunity to, maybe this is something that needs to go up in the heading or something like that, and then you can kind of slim and trim down. So it's all about kind of using the space and watching for repetitions and watching for places where you can repeat things, right? So yeah. References, I did want to show y'all something here, and I'm going to give examples. So one thing that happens a lot in the references, so for example, it might be, ETC chapter, what is this? This is the proposals, right? ETC chapter 9, page, I don't know, 123. I'm making that up. That's okay. That's something that a lot of people do. A lot of times people want to link to an example, and so they'll paste in this really long database link. I'm going to pull up an example from, I'll pull up an example from, let's say that I found an article on technical reports, search. I'm just grabbing something at random here so I can show you. So I've got the really long URL. Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Now, I wouldn't use, first of all, I wouldn't use the TAMUCC database link, because that link is only going to be useful for me individually, and that's kind of a link that's cobbled together in the moment, and it's not really like, I couldn't send that in an email and it would not necessarily be useful to someone else, right? On top of that, it's really freaking long, and that's not working in my design all of a sudden, is it? So there's two things I can do. First of all, if I'm in like one of these long databases, I can always find a permalink, and that's fine. But again, it's still really, really long. So let me show you a trick, a function within Microsoft Word. So I'm going to hold my cursor over the live link. I'm going to right click. If you're on a PC, it might look a little bit different, but I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to hyperlink. I'm going to edit hyperlink. This is going to give me two options. It's got the text to display, and it's got the link itself with the address. So I'm going to leave the address alone, and I'm just going to change the text to display to link and hit OK. And then all of a sudden I have a short, right, that's just got the text for the hyperlink, but then when I click on it, it's going to take me to the thing. Okay, so that's a useful tip for you if that's a thing that you decide to do. Okay, so let's zoom back out and let's look at this whole thing. So like I said, overall, I think this is in good shape. I'd like to see a little bit more distinctiveness between the description category and the purpose category. I'd like to see a little bit more clarity about, are we talking about good things or bad things, things that we must do or things that we must not do, things that it's important for the document to have, or, right? I just need a little bit more clarity about what we're doing with each of these. You can see how he's started to do it down here, right? Don't send confidential information. Don't email angry. Be careful what you're sending and to whom, right? All that kind of stuff is good. I can understand that. It's still concise, it's still brief, but it's got, a little bit of phrasing to help understand that. So yeah, overall I think we're in good shape. I'd watch for places like that as y'all are finishing up. Um, Remember that these are that I moved the due date because of the coronavirus craziness. And if you have questions or problems, please just email me and let me know. Thanks again to Jacob. I hope that this is helpful to you as well as to everybody in the class. All right.